about Dr. Jen Welter. Dr. Jen Welter is the first female to coach in the NFL. In the summer of 2015, she served as a linebackers coach for the Arizona Cardinals, a period of time defined by the bond she has formed with the players. Widely known as a trailblazer and pioneer in professional football, becoming the first woman to coach in the NFL was only her most recent first. She most recently served as a defensive specialist for the Alliance of American Football, AAF. Following her record-breaking accomplishment with the Cardinals, Welter became the head coach of the first Australian women's national team in 2017. Widely known as a trailblazer and pioneer in professional football, Welter became the first woman to play running back in a men's professional football league with the Texas Revolution. In early 2015, Welter was hired as the first female coach in men's professional football, helping coach the most successful Revolution season in franchise history. Prior to joining the world of men's professional football, Welter had a highly decorated 14-year career in women's professional football, which included 4 world championships, 2 gold medals as a member of Team USA in the 2010 and 2013 International Federation of American Football's, the IFAF, Women's World Championship, and 8 All-Star selections. She was inducted into the first class of the Women's Football Hall of Fame on November 30th, 2018. Welter is committed to increasing access and opportunities in football. To empower women through football, Welter designed her signature program, quote, A Day in the Life, unquote, camp, which debuted with the Washington football team, but Washington Redskins women's program in 2015. She continues to create a range of camps for girls and women through her Gridiron Flag Football Camp, along with a number of other community initiatives like her Camp on the Corner program that brings football to youth in underserved areas. She released her first publication, and that's what we'll be talking about today as well, Play Big, Lessons in Being Limitless from the First Woman to Coach in the NFL in 2017. Welter has served on the advisory board for the NFL's Pro Football Hall of Fame Game for Life Academy since 2017. She holds a doctorate degree in psychology, a master's in sports psychology, and a bachelor's degree from Boston College. Let us welcome to the Reading Circle microphones, Dr. Jen Welter. Dr. Welter, good morning.
Hello, how are you?
I tell you what, I'm better now that I hear your voice, because I said I'm always a little nervous on my West Coast guests, and I truly understand it because it's early. So I am doing wonderful. And I just read that bio, and for all of our men and women out there, because I don't want to just gear this toward the females, because I want the men to understand too, in terms of, because we kind of understand our history in terms of females and women, and we still have areas where there are glass ceilings and so forth and so on. So the fact that we're hearing Dr. Welter had so many firsts, that's what we want to talk about this morning, and we want it to be an inspiration. And as I just said, I have 4 daughters, and I've never, ever told them that there's anything that they could not do just because they were a girl. So I am extremely thrilled to have this interview this morning. So Dr. Welter, let's kind of go back to how did this all start?
Well, let me touch on one thing you said with your daughters, that you've never told them anything that they couldn't do because they were a girl. And I think that's really important as parents. It's also tough and a balance we have to maintain, because there are a lot of areas of society that suffer from sins of omission, right? You don't have to tell them that they don't belong or they can't do it. That's reinforced in every area where they don't see somebody that looks like them.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's not just a gender thing. So representation is so important because it gives permission to dream, right? It gives that spark of how I want to be like her, or I could be like her, or, think about, even when it comes to racial diversity, the power of, a movie like Black Panther, right? That you could be the superhero of your own story.
Correct.
And that's across so many industries, right? Like, we talk about it even in the gaming industry that, 50% of gamers almost are girls, and yet there are very few female protagonists. So even in a virtual world, it's hard to be the hero of your own story. So to really give permission to dream, we want to make sure that we are having representation in all areas so that, little kids get to say, yep, that's awesome, and yep, I could be there one day, whether it's football, going to the moon, or, being a superhero.
Absolutely, and I could not agree with you more. Now, see, I'm looking at your bio in terms of the year you were born. It was a little bit prior to your birth whenever they had the whole, the movement in terms of women were burning their bras, and it was the whole movement in terms of women were saying, look, we want to drive trucks, we want to climb telephone poles. Now, I was young at the time, but I just never understood, well, why can't they do that? Why wouldn't a woman be able to drive a truck if she wanted to? If she wanted to be the telephone man or the fireman or whatever, the firewoman rather, or the telephone woman rather, why couldn't she do that? So I've never quite understood this whole notion of not allowing, just because they were female, not to be able to do something. And certainly as we came through watching football, because I remember I became a Pittsburgh Steelers fan in 1972. Like I said, a couple of years before you were born. And in terms of seeing females do anything, females weren't even commentating at that time. I mean, as time went on, we started seeing more female commentators, but you certainly didn't see any females on the football field. So what inspired you to now to want to do or play or be a part of football? Because that is known, as you know, as a male sport.
Yeah, they still to this day call football the final frontier for women in sports. And I know for me as a player, I always took that as a challenge, right? Like, if this is the final frontier, then, when we do this and we do it well, can't we do anything, right? And that came into play later in my career, obviously, when I was playing, and that's kind of what kept me motivated. But as a kid, just like you said, you've never told your daughters there was anything that they couldn't do because they were women, and thankfully, I had a family that was like that too. My mom is an amazing artist, and she is just one of the, like everybody would call her Mama Nancy, right? Like she loved on everybody, and she taught me you could create beauty anywhere in the world, right? And that it wasn't something that you had to buy; it was something you could make. So, like, my finger paintings are hung up on the wall next to what some people would call, like, valuable artists, right? And she was
absolutely,
that was my favorite painting, right?
Absolutely.
And my dad is a Vietnam veteran. He is a legit war hero, 2 silver stars and a bronze star, and then a chiropractor, and also used to race cars when I was a kid. So he was this just crazy combination of toughness and intelligence, and we grew up fishing. Right? That was one of the things that we did throughout when I was growing up, and fish didn't care if you were a male or a female. You either caught it or you didn't. Right? There weren't pink poles and blue poles. You wanted the big fish.
That's right.
You wanted to catch it, and if you didn't, the fish wasn't going to say, oh, I'm going to go easier on her because she's a girl, right? Like, it was a battle. And so I never really, I think, consciously thought, like, the girls versus boys thing. I loved tennis because, I could see women playing on TV. I remember loving, like, Gabrielle Sabatini was my favorite player.
Right.
And, she was beautiful and powerful, and she was everything I thought a woman should be, right? And that, to me, I think was so important. Early when I first learned about football, right, it was like, Vero Beach, Florida, the whole town shuts down on a Friday night. And
Right.
I actually had a friend of mine texting me from one of the games last night, because they're playing there. I'm in California. we're not open yet, right? But she was like, I'm at the football game. I was like, oh my gosh, of course you are, right? But I thought those lights were the brightest lights in the universe, because, you know, it wasn't like college football was miles away, right? And people watched it. But, you know, being in Vero Beach, right, whether you were a Gator or a Seminole or a Hurricane, like, those were all at least 3 hours away, right? And the pro teams weren't any closer. They were, you know, they were the same. So it really was about high school football. And I remember looking at the field and thinking that those were like real life superheroes. And I just was enchanted by it. And I wanted to be one. And I think it was also the first place in the world where somebody told me there were things that boys could do that girls couldn't. So it was kind of like that unrequited love when you're young. And I didn't actually get a chance to play football until I was, other than the high school powder puff game, was I didn't get to play until I was 22 years old.
Wow. So it was something that even though as a child and a teen that you looked and aspired to, you didn't actually, but still, that does still say something in terms of persistence and the power of dreams and words, because ultimately it came to pass. Even though it was at 22, it was something you aspired to when you were younger. Now that's interesting in terms of, and you're talking about Florida and Texas. I mean, football is like on Friday nights. You're right. Everything, particularly in those two states, probably a couple others too, but I know Texas and Florida for a fact, Friday night football shuts it down. So you're in the stands, you're watching the boys play, and what are you telling? Are you telling yourself, gee, I'd like to do that, or that looks like fun, or what's going through your mind as you're watching the boys play?
Well, you know, that's a long time ago, so I don't know if I can tell you exactly my inner monologue more than I just did. But, you know, it was something I thought I could do. In high school, when I was a senior, and I ended up going to a new high school. I was in the first graduating class of an upstart high school, like I'd call it. And, you know, our football team was terrible my senior year because most of the guys had stayed where the program was good, right? Like they didn't want to go to a new program. And so they were really bad. And I was that soccer player who was a problem for everybody. You know, our football coach, who was my track coach, used to say that I was his favorite soccer player because I took everybody out. And he's right, I did. You know, I wore number 13 because it was bad luck for them. Yeah, and I had no bones about it. I still think it's funny that Sarah Thomas is a dear friend of mine, you know, because she's the first ref in the history of my life that hasn't actually been like, I can't stand this person. But, you know, I went to our high school football coach, and I said, you know, Coach Bethel, you should let me play football. I think I could help this team. And he looked at me, and he said, you know what, Miss Welter, you are a heck of an athlete. You're right. You know, you probably could help this football team. But I'm going to ask you not to play, and let me tell you why. And I remember thinking, if this dude tells me I couldn't do it, I'm going to do it. Right? Like, if he tells me I'm not physically capable of doing this, it's about to be on. And he said, you know, I'm a football guy, and I've been one my whole life. And we football guys are the worst. He said, here's what's going to happen. You would get out there, and you would make some guy look bad. It's just going to happen. And then either him or one of his buddies would cheap shot you, and I would kill him and go to jail. Miss Welter, please don't play football. And I just remember laughing so hard that I couldn't argue, right? It wasn't like he said, you're not capable or this, that, the other. It was like, please don't do this. Right. It's about to be a problem. Right. And that was actually an okay answer to me for some reason. And, you know, I didn't play then. Kept a great relationship with Coach Bethel. Still have it to this day. I still tell him he has to tell everybody his first player to go pro was a girl.
And see, that story, I remember reading that in the book. I remember reading that story in the book. of that dialogue that you just talked about.
Yeah. And he still does tell people. I made somebody mentioned his name the other day, and said, that was his guy. And I said, until you asked him if it was you or me, you're going down, buddy.
That's right.
And he was like, no way, like you and Bethel. I was like, yeah, call him right now. And he certainly did. He's like, I like you, man, but I love her.
And see, I'm listening as we talk through this interview. I heard you say, like, whenever it sounds like you, I mean, this isn't obvious, but it sounds like you like challenges. I mean, and so when they said, this is the final frontier, we're like, okay, great. This is what I'm going to do. And I see that the same pattern throughout your bio, as well as even our conversation just now. Like, you better not tell me I can't do it based on ability.
Right.
But
right. Like, and so when I got to college, I found rugby. I had never seen it before in Florida, actually. And, here's this sport that's like soccer meets football, and yet it's tougher because they don't need pads. And
right.
I was immediately in love. I played all 4 years for Boston College, got recruited to the under-23 national team. And at that point, I think they realized that I really am 5'2", and that I really did weigh half of what everybody else weighed. And the coach of the national team, her nickname was Bubba, I remember, because she was the head coach of the Harvard Radcliffe team. So of course we were across the river rivals.
Right.
And she said, at this level, Welter, like, I can teach other people to do what you do, but I can't double your size. And she said, you were the best one here. I have people on my team that are terrified of you, but you are too small and you were, out of position, which was true. And I was devastated, right? I had always believed that I was, destined to have a life in sports.
Right.
And, this was that shot, right? You get that tryout for a national team, and to have not made it, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it, and then graduated from college and got the proverbial real job,
right?
Which really did not suit me. I was good at it and making them a lot of money, but I remember telling my mom I felt like I was dying a little bit each day,
right? Because
there just had to be something better. There had to be something more. This couldn't be everything for me. And, I was playing flag football on weekends and teaching aerobics before and after work. And full disclosure, coming from rugby into flag football is kind of a rough combination because I really never got into that whole flag thing. I was definitely still tackling. And the general manager of the team, called the Mass Mutiny, called and asked if there were any women who they thought could play tackle. And, they were probably like, please take this girl because she tackles anyway. And I did. I got an open tryout and made the team. And like I said, that was it for me. I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And I basically made myself a promise that day that I would step up to every challenge that the game put in my way.
And I noticed, and I'm glad you're sharing that point because I remember reading in the book, at some point you said you were kind of like living like homeless or in your car?
Yeah, that was years after that, but...
The reason I bring that up was you were persistent in reaching your goal. Like the job you were doing, you wasn't feeling it. And I can relate to that because I did 15 years in corporate prior to going into education, and the perks, the travel, the folks that I met was outstanding. Could not beat it. But on the inside, I know what you felt like when you say I felt like you were dying, because I felt the same way. And ultimately, I went back to my first love, which was education, and it was a totally different feeling. So there is definitely a difference whenever you get into whatever your passion is. Mm-hmm.
You do notice that you said, I did. about 15 years corporate, right? Like you were doing time.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Right.
And it's a totally different feeling. You're absolutely right. And I did corporate because my undergrad was in business administration, and I thought, okay, since I have a business administration degree, I'll do corporate. But my heart was always in education, and it's interesting that you picked up on that word because I'm one that hangs on every word as well. And the fact that you picked up on that, yes, subconsciously or Freudian slip, however you want to call it. So. Now
it's probably the most truth that there is. I mean, if it's not for you, it's pretty painful. And for some people, it's like we have a job and we're using that to build something else. But it's really hard to stay motivated when you're doing something that you just are not feeling fulfilled through.
Absolutely.
And some people feel fulfilled by dollars. Right? Like that to them is what drives them, right? It's a game to acquire. And if that's what it is, there will always be more dollars and there will always be more toys. And, you can find satisfaction out of that. But if that's not your driver, then it doesn't really matter what you're quote unquote making because
Correct.
All of the time that you're spending in making it is so painful.
Absolutely. And
I looked around at people who were headhunters like I was, and I thought, oh, there has to be more than life because I don't care how much money these people make. I do not want to be you in 20 years.
That's absolutely right.
Right? Like,
That's absolutely right. I know exactly what you mean. So now which came first, the Australian women's team or the coaching for the Cardinals?
The Cardinals. The Australian women's national team was 2017.
Okay, so how did the whole you got noticed obviously somehow. How did the whole becoming a coach for the Cardinals come about?
I was already coaching in men's pro football. I was coaching in indoor football, which I played first. So the progression was that, I played women's pro football at the highest level and then played men's pro football. In the process of playing on the Texas Revolution, I gained the respect of all the guys I was out there with. And, they used to joke at the time that I was like a little coach on the sidelines because I was on practice squad for a lot of the year, and yet you can't shut the mind off, right? And like the vision, and so I'd see stuff and I'd be like, hey, next time try this, and they'd be like, oh, that worked, she's like our little coach over here because arena teams are notoriously understaffed anyway,
right?
So I could see things and be like, hey, da-da-da, or, they're slant left on this, watch the naked boot. It's about to come back. And, you don't want to chase too hard on the backside or you're going to get hit. Right. And when it would happen, they'd be like, oh, you were right. I'm like, I know that's a setup, right? Don't fall for the okie doke. Don't get hit with the banana in the tailpipe, right? Like there's a reason why they're setting you up. It's so they can take their shot on the backside. And, having been one of the best players in the world at my position, it wasn't hard to see some of those things. And,
right.
I would kind of laugh with them. I'd be like, okay, listen, I get to take all of the knowledge in here in this 5'2" frame and put it in your big old body, right? Like, that's kind of like a dream come true, right? It's like I got the controllers to like a giant robot of strength, right? Like,
absolutely.
And we used to joke about it, right? Like it wasn't a formal thing, and there were no women coaching in men's pro football at the time. And so I was at an event that I was going to. It was like Dallas Cowboys, and it was kind of a stage live interview event that I had done for years. And I was one of the ones they would bring up to talk football, and usually arena and the NFL didn't really mix, right? So I wasn't expecting that the guys would be there, but they had a new head coach who was a former Dallas Cowboy, Wendell Davis.
Correct.
And he had brought all the guys, and, it was off season. So I walk in and, like, it's all my teammates, right? And they'd pick me up and toss me around like a football because relative to them, I am one. And Wendell sees it, and he's like, who is this girl that all my guys love? And, his defensive coordinator laughed. He was like, Coach, that's your running back. And Wendell told me later, he's like, I knew everything about you, but I never expected the guys to love you like that. And, it captured his attention. So he calls me over and he starts grilling me about the team, what was good, what wasn't, what would I change, starts talking to me about football. And I was like, okay, buddy, like, you want to go? Let's go. Right? Because Wendell is very direct. So I kind of pushed back at him, and we had a great conversation that lasted a few hours and a few drinks, right? And the next day he called me. I remember I was on a spin bike getting warmed up because I was about to teach a spin class, and he said, all Devin and I could talk about on our way home yesterday was how you have to coach this football team. And I said, no. What do you mean no? And I said, no, girls don't coach football. I'm not doing that. And he said, not a lot of guys are going to give you this opportunity. You're taking this job. And I said, no. And I hung up on him. And the next day he called me back and told me about myself. He said, do you remember how I told you not a lot of guys were going to give you this opportunity and you were taking this job? I said, yeah. He said, good, I took it for you. You're coaching for me. And by the way, you can't quit. Otherwise, the entire narrative surrounding women coaching in men's pro football will be, we had a girl once and she quit. And I was like,
wow.
And he was so right, though, where I lovingly say that Wendell drop kicked me to success, because I wouldn't have necessarily taken that shot, but he knew that I also wouldn't quit. Those are two very different things. I may have not felt up for it, but I wasn't somebody who was made to quit. So I ended up coaching for the Revolution that season. Really learned a lot. The guys and I got along very well. We still have great relationships to this day. I talked to Clinton Solomon, who played with me on the Revolution the other day. I talked to Robert Williams, who was one of my players and a captain for me, and I got to give him a recommendation for a coaching staff that was thinking about bringing him on, and and we really became closer than you necessarily think about some of those things, because arena football has so many things you have to deal with, right? It's not just like big contracts and big dollars. It's bounced paychecks. It's guys that are making a couple $100 a week,
right,
to pursue their dreams, and to whether we had guys who, our rosters flipped constantly. We had guys who might be hurt and trying to get tape to be able to show that they were healthy to get back on an NFL roster. Just so many things. And to me, those things were all, relatively easy because I'd been through them all, right? Like all the life stuff, we had to deal with that in women's football because it was passion and it was belief and it wasn't, necessarily dollars. And so I was uniquely equipped to help with those things between, the personal experience and also having a PhD, right? So it turned out to me that I was better at it than maybe I would have thought. I like to think that progress is contagious, right? Like you see progress in one area of society, and then it opens people's minds to progress in others. And, Sarah Thomas, who if you all don't know who's listening, Sarah Thomas is the first full-time female ref in NFL history. Her and I lovingly say that our destinies are intertwined because, and they are on so many levels. It's crazy. She's, over the last 5 years, she's become, one of my really, truly dear friends. And when she was hired, a reporter asked Bruce Arians, who was at that time the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, if he could ever see a woman coaching in the NFL. And he said, the second a woman proves that she can make these guys better, she'll be hired. And so, talking to my head coach, he basically said, well, we should call Bruce. Can you get me his number? And I thought, you played in the league. Can't you get his number? But okay. Right? Like, I'm not doing this, right? Like, I don't know anybody in there. But, I kind of took it as a challenge. And thankfully, when you practice at, really early in the morning, you end up with some time on your hands and a whole lot of curiosity. And so I went on the Arizona Cardinals website and found a number and called it. I was calling the team on behalf of my head coach because my head coach wanted to talk to their head coach. It just so happened that he wanted to talk to him about me. And I ended up working my way to Bruce's assistant, Wesley. And, Wes is a great guy. He said, I think DA would really want to take this call. Let me take your head coach's number, and I'll have him give you a call back. Just an FYI, it's, it was a couple days before the draft. So, before the draft. And he's like, so, we're a little busy around here. Well, I thought I had gotten blown off completely, but I was really proud of myself for having, called the Cardinals. And yet a few weeks later, I walked into practice and Devin says, you'll never guess who I talked to yesterday. It was Bruce Arians, and he said, tell me about this girl. And, he eventually invited me to OTAs, and we hit it off, and obviously, he ended up bringing me onto his staff,
So listening to that, even when you were playing the arena football, when you were saying you were on the sidelines, so not only did you play the game, but you knew the game. Now, there's a difference between playing it and knowing it to the degree where you were able to sit on the sidelines and now say, look, try this, do that. Look, he got you there, do this. And then you said your teammate would come back and say, you know what, you were right.
Mm-hmm.
So there was
this. They're competitors, right? Like, competitors want to get better. If you can help them get better, they'll listen. Now, if you tell them some junk and it doesn't work, well, then you can talk all you want and they're not going to listen.
Right. So now, when you were playing, what was the perspective of you? Because ultimately they came to love you, but did they treat you as one of the guys, or did they go soft on you because you were a girl? Or did they say, well, you know what, since you're out here with us, we're going to hit the same way we hit another guy? Or what was kind of like that dynamic like?
I'm going to ask you right now, if you had a female come into your world and compete for your job, do you think you're going to go soft on her?
Not at all. See, that's what I said. I mean, in my mindset, right. Not at all. So and again, I don't want to assume that's the way they were. So they embraced that. There was no, oh, she's a girl. So that's great, because again, like I told you earlier, dealing with 4 young ladies myself, and I'm constantly saying, look, I really don't care what you want to go. If you think you can do it and you want to work hard for it, go for it. That's exactly, it sounds like the way you were doing. I heard you say the PhD. How the PhD came along when? You had that prior to the coaching or along as you were coaching?
No, I got that while I was playing women's football.
So while you were playing. So not only were you playing, you were still doing school, doing your schoolwork and obtaining the highest degree that you can obtain while you were doing that. Mm-hmm. So see, that says a lot too.
As a woman in football, there was no path, right? So it wasn't like, you were going to go get this job from this, and, people are looking at you like, oh, well, when you finish and you've got 2 gold medals, 4 Super Bowls, we're going to put you in the broadcast booth. Didn't exist, right? Like, we're going to take you and we're going to, start to train you up on coaching, or, we'll roll you into a GA or, do any of these things. Those didn't exist for women.
Right.
And so what I thought is that I could take my practical experience being one of the best in the world and, combine that with the theoretical knowledge and the background of getting a PhD to be a unique value proposition to the sports space. Not just one or the other, which you tend to see, right? Like either you were a person that played the game and just had insight, not diminishing that at all because it's a huge amount of insight, but you gained all your insight through the field and maybe books and things like that, but not necessarily a formalized education. Or you had a formalized education and maybe not the practical experience of playing the game. And those were things I heard often, right? Like, I remember talking to guys and they're like, well, yeah, I can't talk to somebody if they never played ball.
Right.
Right. Like, he just won't get the game. And there is something to that, right? Like the experiences and the things that you go through that fortify you. It's often a lot of energy to take an outsider and completely educate them, right? Like,
correct.
Not only do you not understand what I went through, right, as a person in the sport, but you don't even get my sport. So then if it's exhausting to be like, oh, I did this on first down, and somebody be like, well, what's first down? Oh, right? Like we got a lot of work to do before we can even have the conversation, right? And so knowing that, the guys knew I had been through it and taken the hits, right? Like literally and figuratively.
Right.
There's just a lot of street cred there. And street cred is so important.
Oh, absolutely. So now you walk into the Arizona, and not only did you coach, you coached like one of the positions that hit the hardest and are usually the biggest. You coached the linebackers.
Mm-hmm.
So
I coached linebackers and D-line.
Right. So now you walk in and Bruce introduces you as the new linebacker coach. Now, I'm assuming they already knew, or was it a surprise to them?
No, they already knew. Actually, I think this is one of the things that, from a leadership perspective, that Bruce did, which I find so impressive, is when he had decided that he might want to do this, right, and bring me in, he actually talked to the leaders in his locker room. He told them, and they had input, so it was partially their decision. So they had buy-in. The guys were really excited to be a part of history and to, change what it meant to be a coach in the NFL.
Absolutely.
So the players were proud. So there was no shock factor to them, and it wasn't like, oh, well, you have to do this. Nope. They wanted to do it, and they really treated me that way too. So, cheers to Bruce for that lesson in leadership. And the guys, again, they knew everything about me before I walked in the door. They had watched my game film. They knew I played in men's pro football. And honestly, when I talk to guys in the league who, like I've met a bunch of them and they're like, yeah, I coached in the NFL. Okay, well, that's great and all, but I had some pretty crappy coaches. So what does that say about you? And I'd be like, damn, okay.
But right? I just think, and I remember, go ahead.
Seriously, when they compared that to, they're like, oh, you're the girl who played? Oh, no, that's the real deal, right? Like, to them, that was the biggest thing, to have been out on the field and taken the hits with the guys. They knew that I was in it for the right reason. Right? It doesn't mean you have to always be perfect or to have all of the right answers, but you really couldn't doubt that I was in it for the same love that they were.
Absolutely. And I remember reading in the book, because this is where kind of like one might could see it as the softer side of the feminine side. And I think you even referenced that in the books whenever you had sent each one of them like a motivational card.
Yep.
Chat a little bit about that, because it wound up making a very big difference.
It did. So the night before my first game, we're getting ready for this historic moment. And it's so funny because, like, there weren't a whole lot of girls around the program. There was Lisa, who was the sideline reporter, and she was a brunette also, right? And yet we don't look alike. We're both brunettes, and I mean, she's tiny and adorable, and in no other situation would you think that she was me. And then there was another woman, Renee, who was on security, and Lisa was much younger than me. Renee was probably 10 or 15 years older than me. And yet the two of them would laugh all the time. They'd be like, if one more person asks me for my interview or for my autograph, right? Like, they'd get hit up by fans. I'd be like, oh, please do it. Here's what it looks like, right? Like, and they would laugh, right? So we had a great time about it because, like, even Lisa's, like, shorter than me. Renee was, like, taller than me. Like, we were just all females with brown hair, right? And yet they would get asked for their autographs, and, like, there were so few women that it was like any time that I walked anywhere, it was like all eyes on you, right? And this night before the first game, it was really like that, and it was so awkward. So I went and hid in my room because I didn't need to deal with it or walk into it. It was kind of like there was a theme song of like bum 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 when I walked by, and so I went up into my room, and I had made sure that the TV was disconnected for me in training camp because I just didn't need to really hear what people were saying, whether it was good or bad. Like, I didn't need it, right? It wasn't going to do me any good, so there was no TV to escape to. And I'm sitting in this room, and it's like before big moments, and your mind is everywhere, and a lot of the times it's not good, right? Like, am I going to run out onto the field and like face plant in front of all these people, right? Like trip over my own feet or something, like, all of these things that could play out. And the nervousness before that big moment, I realized it was the same as, I had through big games throughout my career. And that, I had felt that way before as a player, and that it was that night for all of my guys too. And I started taking the attention off of myself and putting it to where it really needed to be, which was on them. And so I took an Uber to a Hallmark. And I got to tell you, it's been a really long time since I'd been to a Hallmark. I didn't really recall that it was so floral or, glittered or decorative. And I start looking around and thinking this is quite possibly the worst coaching decision in the history of the NFL. And, and I eventually was like, nope, I'm not going to let Hallmark defeat me. And I turned back around and found this one section in Hallmark that has cards that are not all pink and glittery necessarily, and they are just quite right and quite white. Turns out it was the wedding section. And in the wedding section, there was just these plain cards that all they had on the front was an embossed heart. And I always used to tell the linebackers that, we're the heartbeat of the defense, because when we hit, it changes the tempo and the tenor of the whole team. And so I bought these cards and brought them with me to my room, and I start writing, just little things about like, hey, kind of recapping conversations we'd had through the week. Kevin Minter, who was my captain, was like, hey, I need you to own the huddle, leave no doubt that, you can and are the right guy for the job kind of thing. And, one of my undersized guys was like, you don't have to be big to play big, just look at me, right? And just things that, I knew the voices in their head would be loud, and I wanted the voices in their head to be mine because I knew what I would say to them.
Right.
And so, I stayed up writing these notes throughout the night, and the best thing for me was that the time flew by. And what could have been a hard time for me really wasn't, because I put my energy to something proactive and positive, and I didn't actually know how I was going to get the notes in their lockers, and
right.
figured that out. And then it was interesting because, before the game, a couple of the guys were like, "Man, Coach, I really appreciated those words." And I was like, "Oh, cool. They don't hate me." Right. and think it was a terrible idea. And then at the end of the game, a reporter came up to me and said, history was made tonight at University of Phoenix Field. For the first time in the NFL, a female took the sidelines as a coach, and we heard you did something very special for your players. You left notes in their lockers. Would you care to comment? And I just remember being like, y'all sold me out. I thought that the locker room was like Vegas, right? Like what happens in the locker room stays in the locker room. Well, apparently not in this case.
Right.
And I was like, but it turns out that my captain, Kevin Minter, had told the reporter that in his entire playing career, he'd never had anyone care like that.
That's what caught my eye when I read that part of the book, because it didn't speak to male, female, big, little, football. It spoke to human nature, and all of us just want to be appreciated. So the fact that you showed them
empathy.
Yes.
Empathy is not a male or a female trait. It's a leadership trait.
Correct.
Right? And people want to be appreciated. Like, nothing about a note is inherently male or female, but taking the time to write it is just an appreciation of somebody's trials, tribulations, their, what they're going through. And I mean, that's a tough moment.
Correct.
Right? Like going out on that field for that first game, that's the realization of a dream that started when a kid caught a football and said, "Mama, I'm going to play in the NFL one day."
That's correct. So again, that's what, when I read that, I was like, wow. I mean, because see, like you just said, that doesn't have anything to do with male or female. That's our inherent human nature of wanting to be appreciated. And the fact that you took the time to do that, that would have been a big deal for me too. And it resonated with me because it sounds like something I would have done as well, because I'm really big into appreciating folks and folks feeling appreciated, and as well as folks appreciate what I do, what have you. So that really leaped out. I mean, for the listening audience and those of you on Facebook, if you don't know who I'm speaking with, I am talking, and I've promoted it on this, so if you can read, you'll see it. But for those who don't know, I'm talking to Dr. Jen Welter, and among many other things, she's the first female to coach in the NFL. I was also reading the book. You said the NFL no longer stood for no female league, was something like that. Mm-hmm. it no longer stood for that. No females in the league, NFL. But she's been in the Olympics as well, on the Australian women's team. She's played in the Arena Football League, and she's had the opportunity to coach in the NFL. I heard you mention Sarah a couple times. That was another thing in the book that leaped out at me. I think you two had met. Everybody was looking at the two of you, because I think, was it the coin toss, or you were at midfield or something? Everybody wanted to see how you two were going to react, the first female referee and the first female NFL coach.
Well, we shook hands.
All right.
On the sideline, right? Like, and it's such a normal football game thing, right? Like, every coach and ref shake hands before the game, from peewees to the pros. And yet, for the first time in the history of the National Football League, that was two women.
So, like I said, this interview, was divinely timely for so many different reasons. Because when I emailed you or LinkedIn'd you earlier in the week, Justice Ginsburg had just passed. And she was, and I think I even said back to you, just like Justice Ginsburg, you're a trailblazer as well. And I'm always happy whatever is diverse wise in terms of pushing the bar. Because for me, people are people are people are people. People can do what they can do and do what they do or whatever they don't do. But it really doesn't have anything to do with gender, race, so forth and so on. So the fact that Justice Ginsburg had passed away during the time we were setting this up, and yesterday was National Daughters Day, to me is just kind of all of it really kind of divinely fits together. And I also see here that you're giving back. You're still giving back with your camps for the girls, day in the life, so forth and so on. Talk a little bit about that. Your play big lessons, so forth.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's so important to look at where we can make an impact. And I remember when I was in the NFL, I would get all of these messages and pictures, and basically the overall theme from both young girls and those who had young girl dreams, right, that maybe weren't realized in football, were like, thank you for letting me know I wasn't wrong for loving this game, right, and that there wasn't something wrong with me. And when I finished my time in the NFL, I became really conscious of what things there were for young girls in football. And what I found is that there weren't a whole lot. There was no national program working to get girls in football and give them resources. There were pockets of great programming, meaning, there might be like the New York Sharks, which is a women's team that existed. It was one of the very first women's tackle teams. They did a Fins Up for Girls program, but that was just for girls in New York. And Florida high school flag football, coming from my home state, it's a varsity high school sport, but there wasn't something nationally. And I kind of looked and I was like, if I don't do this, who's going to, right?
Right.
And, I always push myself when I look at things and they might scare me. It's like, if I don't do this, then the wrong woman was the first female coach in the NFL, because somebody who had more to offer or more to give or more grit should have been here instead of me. And so I started Gridiron Girls 3 years ago, and with no sponsors and just some friends and people I'd coached with and people who believed in me, just kind of agreeing to the idea. I announced that I was going to do a national tour of flag football camps for girls, because I had tried for months to get sponsors and get it off the ground, and nobody thought it would work. So, I just kind of stuck my toe in the dirt and said I was going to do it, and it needed to be national, because otherwise somebody could just say, well, that was just in this market, right? But it's, it wouldn't work here. And so the goal was to do 12 camps in a year. And in our first year, we ended up with 18.
Wow.
And we've now done 35. It actually crushes me a whole lot right now, because last year at this time I was doing my national tour, and, with COVID, that's been sidelined. But
right.
It still really is a belief. And, we had a huge boost in the end of 2018 when Adidas backed the camps and signed me as their first female football asset. So just like the guys, and, really just looking at ways that we could change the game for the next generation, because, the way you feed the top is that the girls, not only do they have to see it's possible, like they, can when they see Sarah's blonde ponytail out there, which
right.
They just now, for the first time, she got a snapback, and so you could see her hair. That's actually what I was giving her a hard time about. I posted that my favorite part of Monday Night Football was to finally be able to see her blonde ponytail, right? But I mean, those things that most people wouldn't notice, to me, I notice.
Right.
Right, like it's a big thing because any boy or girl watching can see a ponytail and know that a ref can be a male or a female.
Correct.
Right, and that imprint on their psyche is so powerful, right? So you can see women like that, and then you have opportunities to try it and love it and learn it at an early age, so that the dream is formed, and then the opportunities are there, and those things I didn't have. So that's a lot of the places where I look at where I could have an impact are, what things aren't necessarily being done, and what things need to be done and will have an impact on the next generation coming up.
Oh, absolutely. And see, the exposure is so critical, and the fact that someone can see that it's been done. It's almost like Roger Bannister with the 4-minute mile. Folks didn't think it could be done until he did it. And the same thing with all these various barriers that are being broken, whether it's gender-wise, sexual orientation-wise, race-wise, or what have you. People begin to now say, okay, it can be done because I've seen it done. And that's why I think all of these are so critical. If I'm not mistaken, there was another female coach named Since You.
Oh, yeah, there have been a few.
Right.
Actually.
But you kind of opened the door for that to happen. In order for that to happen, you were the first. You opened the door for that. But since that time, it has done not only for the youth, it is also for other coaches said, wait a minute, I better take a look at this. And they've now hired as well. And my guess before it's all over, if Sarah's not the only one, there are going to be more female refs as well.
For sure.
So,
For sure.
Again, folks, my guest is Dr. Jen Welter. Her book is Play Big. As a matter of fact, the titles, and because I'm encouraging, as I always do in terms of when I have my authors on here, is to go out and get the book, whether you download it or buy it, the paperback or the hard copy, whichever way you get it, I truly encourage you to get it. The chapter titles are Play Your Own Game, Be an and, not an or, Play Priceless, What Makes Us Different Makes Us Strong, Getting Back Up. Success isn't just talent, it's fortitude. And that's what we've been talking about all morning, is fortitude. Once it's been done, it can't be undone. We were just talking about it. You've seen it now. Winning in the boys club. We shared a little bit about that. When it's us against them, we all lose. Don't hand off your destiny. Step into it. Go all in. Wearing the big red shorts. Be authentic as you lead, leaving a legacy, a league of our own. And the conclusion is The Gridiron Girl. The book is Play Big. And the author is Dr. Jen Welter. Dr. Welter, any closing thoughts as we get ready to close out? And again, I appreciate you so much for rising early, because for those of you in the listening audience, if you joined us late, Dr. Welter is calling from California. She's calling from the West Coast, and it is 3 hours difference. So while it's 8:04 here, it is 5:04 there, and she's been with me since 4 o'clock her time. The book is Lessons in Being Limitless, from the first woman to coach in the NFL. And again, it is Play Big. Her name is Dr. Jen. That's Jen Welter, Welter. You can go to her website, jenwelter.com. So any closing thoughts, Dr. Welter, in terms of, what do you tell our kids, our girls, our boys, our men, our women? The mic is yours. Anybody you want to shout out, any promo you want to do at this point, I shut my mic off, and you can do anything with the exception of, say, a dollar amount, but any of your services, your speaking engagement, coaching, whatever you'd like to promote, you have the opportunity.
Well, first I would just say, if you're listening and you haven't seen somebody in your position, it doesn't mean that you can't, right? It's impossible until it's not. So, be really good in your process, because when you're good, I always say it's let your game speak, right? When you're good, someone will want you. And those who don't, let it be their loss, right? And if you're listening and you are in a position to help create change, be that person who finds reasons to think differently, to open doors, open minds, and be a mentor in the process, right? And do have a plan for creating change within your industry, within society, in those areas that you can. Also, as we look at, what's going on in our world now, for everybody listening, get out and vote. It's easy to not feel like you have control over the world and in that parts of your destiny, but that is something that, we have fought for historically, and we're, our fight is only as good as our willingness to execute. So go out and vote to make those differences. And then one other thing is, I not only authored Play Big, but I created a children's series that was born out of, I guess, the times of the pandemic, and it's called Critter Fitter. Essentially, it's using critters to get kids fitter, both through motion and emotion. We have 4 books out now: Busy Bee, an adventure in movement, When a Ladybug Can't Hug, which is all about social distancing and connecting through the heart while staying 6 feet apart. We have Wearing a Mask Says I Love You, that goes through all of the CDC guidelines and gives the kids an opportunity to be a proactive part of the solution by giving the mask a hero story. And our latest book, which just dropped, is called The Resilience, and it is an ant-filled adventure with characters like Sergeant Brilliance and Distance, to help kids understand all of the stuff that's going on around COVID, conversations like quarantine and antibodies, to help them give a broader perspective of how we can all do the things that need to be done to come back to, hopefully some sense of normal. So to me, that was my way that I could move the needle in these troubling times. And I would challenge everybody listening to really find a way to be able to move the needle in your skill set. Breaking things down and voice tend to be 2 things I'm pretty darn good at. So we did that in kids' voice this time, but don't feel like it's too big. Find a way and a space that you can move the needle, because you will be pleasantly surprised how much it not only moves the needle in society, but in your own life as well.
No, absolutely. I'm actually was doing a Facebook Live on every now and again. I'll combine the technologies from being here on the air as well as whenever I can use my phone or whatever to do Facebook Live. And I did that this morning, and people are telling me in the comments they ordering your book. So it's done. Like somebody just hit me up and said, I just ordered it. So that's great. They're getting the chance to hear the interview. And again, it's going to be archived on my YouTube channel as well. And for those of you who are listening and watching here on Facebook Live, thank you so much. I appreciate the listenership and the viewership. And again, Dr. Welter, I take my hat off to you, because I always love trendsetters and pioneers, because somebody had to open the door. Somebody had to be the one to say, you know what, we can do this, because females in football in general, that's counter. And depending on how far back you go, if you go back into the 40s and the 50s and the 60s or whatever, that was totally counter. And so the fact that you were able to smash through that wall and it still was able to do, because I know there's a chapter in your book. I mean, there's a part of the book talking about still able to be beautiful, still be able to be feminine, still the way does that make you less beautiful just because somebody else says somebody else is beautiful, and so forth and so on. I mean, you hit on all the right points. And so I thoroughly enjoyed the book, and I'm glad that those in the listening audience, those are ordering it, you will enjoy it and you will learn from it as well. And again, I don't know if you're accustomed to getting up early, because I know in football and practices and stuff maybe you do, but I don't know if you need to go back to bed or whatever. But I thank you so much for rising as early as you did, and I knew you would be of value to the listening audience, and you were just that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and for being a proud girl dad.
All right. Yes, indeed. So this will happen. I will do what I need to do in terms of getting the show on YouTube, and I'll give you a copy of the links and everything. And once you receive them, they're yours. You can share them and anything you want to do with them, however you want to, if you want to put them on your website, you want to share them with somebody else, you want to delete them, whichever way, it's up to you. But you will get a copy of the link whenever I'm done with it.
Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We are done for the morning. Again, like I said, if you need to go back and take a nap, I'm not mad at you. And I will be following your work as well. All right.
All righty. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Take care.